Man-made thunder echoed in the valley as a stream of shells from the Clint's autocannon puffed a trough of white into the air before the rapidly moving machine's pilot could correct the aim and bring it into line with the Black Knight's already damaged leg. The shells blasted armor away in huge flakes as the stream continued up and hammered into the lower chest before the shot spent itself. Meanwhile, the sun-bright trio of energy beams from the Lancelot almost obscured the entire upper torso as twin large lasers and a particle projection cannon snapped out from the mech toward the Black Knight. Visions of Rebirth, page 77 by Randall N. Bills. As much flack as Quickcell receives for their unique interpretation of how a defense manufacturer should behave, there are some other companies who have a less than stellar track record for customer service. For example, our good friends at Andoran Industries Limited, which was based out of Bell and Watterson, earned themselves a reputation for low entry cost battlemech technology, but with a large asterisk tacked onto the end. Their first and only product was designated the CLNT Clint. The 40-ton medium battlemech was constructed to meet the design specs of a Star League Defense Force contract penned in 2607. The original intent was to fill a niche for a swift and flexible battlemech which could bridge the gap between light mechs and heavier 45 to 55-ton mainline workhorse mechs. One of the major reasons why Andoran Industries was able to secure the contract was that they offered to produce the Clint on the cheap. Even though the SLDF contracts were notoriously lucrative, the cash didn't grow on trees, and sure as heck wasn't distributed equally across all types of companies. If you already had a relationship with the Star League, then you were much more likely to make good money. Looking to cut costs wherever possible, Andoran avoided subcontracting for parts as much as possible. These in-house designs cut down on transport costs and reduced the likelihood of being fleeced by distributors. But as a result, it also meant that key components of the Clint were specialized and couldn't be replaced with standardized parts off the shelf. This will come back to bite the customers later on. Constructed from a unique Model 3 chassis wrapped around a Pitman 240 Fusion engine, the Clint could hit a top speed of 97 km per hour. This put it at a distinct disadvantage when looking at swift mechs like the Cicada, and was slightly slower than the Assassin, but both were significantly less powerful as a result. Remember that opportunity cost spares no one. The original CLNT-1-2R lacked jump jets in order to cram in a Buster-class AC-10 autocannon in the right arm, which was fed by a single ton of ammunition. This left just a single ton of mass for a backup Martel standard medium laser set into the center torso. After the installation of a gyro and cockpit, the remaining 4.5 tons of mass was devoted to standard plate armor, which offered 72 points of protection. This was a half-ton more than the Cicada 2A and matched the Assassin 21, but is significantly less than the max possible for a 40-ton mech. Unfortunately, cramming that Buster-class AC-10 into a 40-ton battlemech caused significant structural stress issues for the prototype. Without a quick, and more importantly inexpensive fix, the Andoran brass decided to tweak the plans for the Clint's first production run. The CLNT-2 3Ts that marched off the assembly line on Bell were able to leap up to 180 meters thanks to the addition of 6 Andoran model JJ-2 jump jets. This new 696 movement profile drastically improved the Clint's agility and ability to function as a forward medium scout mech. The cost for this boost was paid for in the downgraded Armstrong AC-5 autocannon set into the right arm. Thankfully, a second Martel medium laser was wedged into the left torso, which kept the overall possible damage per alpha strike at 15. The end result with the 2-3T was a 40-tonner which sacrificed some speed in favor of a heftier punch. The AC-5 might not be an MVP weapon, but it had good range and allowed the Clint to be a menace on the midfield. The 3T could outdamage the other mechs in its weight point at the time of construction, and that had to count for something. Broderick grinned, aware that Bishop's Clint was not up to squaring off against the heavier mech, even before considering the damage his would-be Brutus had entered the fight with. And while it would have been the easiest thing in the world for Broderick to switch his fire to bail Bishop out, treason had a price. As he unleashed another volley of LRMs at the Centurion Kalisa was engaged with, Broderick opened a direct channel with Wilkins' Phoenix Hawk. Bishop will have to fend for himself. Flushing the Competition, Shrapnel number 16, page 10, by Steve P. Vincent. Production of the Clint was limited, though by the collapse of the Star League there were more than 300 3Ts in existence. This is surprising because those who purchased the mech quickly discovered that maintenance on it was a challenge. With specialized in-house parts and long logistics lines, Andoran ended up making a killing on aftermarket maintenance plans. Even heftier items like the gyro had to be purchased from Andoran, which left more than a few Clints up on the racks until a replacement part could show up. Injury was added to insult when the Clint factory was destroyed in 2812 when Bell 10 was targeted during the first succession war fighting between House Davion and House Liao. Imagine being the tech who was waiting for 6 months to get your Clint parts just to get notice that there won't be any more parts. Enjoy your Clint-shaped turret. The problems for Andoran Industries compounded when they got word that the original plans for the mech were lost in the destruction, leaving the company with precious few options. Without the SLDF contracts and no functioning production lines, Andoran Industries was forced into bankruptcy. The remaining Clints in existence across the Inner Sphere were on their own for the foreseeable future. Of course, this fact didn't bother the notorious Red Jack Ryan, who added a little infamy to the Clint's reputation when he used 4 of them in a lance against his enemies. Functioning well as powerful scouts, the Red Jack Lance of Clint's could also dish out a considerable amount of fire as they focused on enemies that sought to box them in. Short of lucky hits with long-range weapons from heavier opponents, Ryan's enemies continually found themselves unable to deal with the swift lance. As time passed, the number of Clints did gradually erode, though not as much as one might think. Comstar estimated that by 3052 there were still roughly 200 of them around. This was apparently enough to prompt the Capellans to develop an upgrade kit for the mech, which counts as our Helm Memory Core upgrade. Starting in 3050, Clint owners could spring for the CLNT 23U upgrade, which surprisingly offered the swap to 10 double heatsinks. The structure remained otherwise untouched, including the 4.5 tons of standard plate armor. As it turned out, the double heatsinks were necessary as the upgrade kit ripped out that AC-5 autocannon from the right arm and replaced it with a Magma Firestar extended-range particle projection cannon. The traditional 2 medium lasers were swapped out for the pulse laser equivalents. The end result for the 2-3U Clint was a machine that could hit significantly harder at long and short range, while slightly sacrificing the mid-range damage for the standard medium lasers. The added benefit of being able to operate free from ammunition supply lines was an additional perk that had to be noted. As far as heat generation goes, a moderate amount of management was necessary anytime the ERPPC was involved. If jump jetting and employing the medium pulse lasers, tossing in that PPC shot could leave the Clint 3U glowing. The 2-3U ended up being so appreciated that it sparked renewed interest in the battlemech. When Bell refit yards opened up on the former Clint production site, a design team from Defiance Industries on Farillo was tasked with coming up with a FedCom version of the battlemech. Meshing salvaged specs and new technologies, their efforts led to the eventual production of the CLNT-5U in 3062. A score of long-range missiles came screaming down, loosed by a dervish. A dozen explosions hopscotched across the back and head of the javelin. The mech went down on one knee, then pushed itself up just in time to take a double volley of fire from the Clint and Phoenix Hawk to the chest and face. The javelin rocked back on its heels, black smoke pouring out from a hole in the back of its head. It nodded once, as if to acknowledge its fate, then tipped forward and fell with a crash, narrowly missing the elevator shaft. The Alexandria Job, Shrapnel number 15, by Giles Gamage. When the Clint 5U design team at Defiance got to work, they didn't accept anything as a given. From the ground up, in many ways, this new Clint would be an entirely new beast. In order to shave off mass, endosteel was used for the mech's core, and the addition of a light fusion engine brought an additional 2.5 tons into play. 12 double heatsinks provided reasonable cooling, and in a surprising move, the 5U's armor protection was nearly doubled, up to 8 tons of standard plate. Instead of a PPC, a Maxell extended-range large laser was placed into the right arm to provide the mech with its long-range punch. At mid and short range, the Clint could bring in 3 ER medium lasers, 1 in the center torso location and 2 in the left side. Because it is a battle mech that was created in the 3060s, it of course had to have a C3 computer in it, and finally, to add some additional threat to close-range conflict resolution, target acquisition gear was added to the center torso to allow the 5U to spot for artillery. Heat management for the 5U isn't a big chore, but it's definitely not a heat-neutral machine. Anytime that ER large laser comes into play, you have to be mindful. A full alpha strike on the run net the mech at 5+ heat into the red, which does trigger that first -1 movement penalty. If the jump jets come into play, one would do well to leave that large laser out of the mix entirely, lest the Clint 5U end up a squishy and attractive target upon landing. Anduri's guts clenched until he wanted to vomit as he saw the Black Knight fall to the ground in an avalanche of torn and scorched metal. Though he wanted to scream, he held his breath as the only standing mech, the Clint, slowly moved closer. A pregnant half-minute passed before the Clint raised its arm, signaling the fight was over and all pilots were, at the minimum, alive. Visions of Rebirth, page 79, by Randall N. Bills. The Clint production line on Ferrilo ended up being crucial for Defiance following the chaos and destruction ushered in by the Word of Blake's gerfuffle. Taking the already advanced 5U, Defiance added even more advanced technology in an attempt to gain an edge over the Blakeists. The resulting CLNT-6S sacrificed its jump jets but was given a larger 280 light fusion engine which pushed the mech's movement profile to 711-0. To buy space for equipment and 6.5 tons of heavy ferrofibrous armor, a small cockpit was installed into the head. No critical locations were left unused, factoring in the 12 double heat sinks and all-energy weapon loadout. Not one, but 2 ER large lasers were installed into the right arm, which boosted the mech's long-range punch at the cost of making it a warm ride. At mid-range, 2 ER medium lasers in the left torso could potentially wreak some havoc, and finally an emotional support ER small laser was added to that final open cockpit location. The heat management for the 6S is not as bad as it might initially look. The 12 double heat sinks can handle the dual ER large lasers firing each turn with only the +2 heat generation from running spilling over into the red. At mid and close range, dropping one of the ER large lasers from the mix allows for the firing of everything else, including the ER small laser, and it'll be the same situation with the 2+ from running. The Clint 6S is a tough customer, and the prospect of taking this 40-tonner out to snipe with those 2 ER large lasers could be an effective strategy against slower and heavier foes who could have trouble hitting faster targets with their fancy schmancy Gauss rifles. It is food for thought. If you're not a fan of the 6S, or you just can't get your hands on any of that sweet Lyran technology, don't worry, because there are 2 other variants for the Clint which also hit the market in 3069. The next was designated the CLNT-33T, and it represented a return to form in a more Spartan package. It was first spotted among the Taurian Concordat units maintaining the border with the Federated Suns. The 3T had a standard structure and engine with a 696 movement profile. 6 tons of ferrofibrous armor provided 107 points of protection and represented the most advanced structural feature. Even the 10 heat sinks were the single-strength variety. Keeping with the Spartan theme, the original T-Series standard medium lasers remained in this updated version, split between the left and center torso. The light AC-5 autocannon in the mech's right arm was rumored to have been sourced from the Word of Blake, but it did allow for the installation of case in the right torso to mitigate the threat of the 2 tons of LAC-5 ammunition stored there. The Clint 3-3T represents a good faith effort to make use of that light autocannon, and I can't complain about it too much in the context of periphery battle mechs. It's rugged and useful in a wide variety of situations. If you're running a Taurian campaign, it could be worth giving the 3-3T a go. The last of the 3069 variants is my favorite, for reasons that may quickly become obvious. The CLNT-23UL shows up in the historical record as a fun early entry into the pantheon of official plasma rifle carriers, and I love it. Constructed around pretty standard 2 series fare, the Clint 23UL has nothing special going on structurally except for 10 double heat sinks. Even the 4.5 tons of standard armor harkens back to the original Star League Clint. What makes this variant a gem is that right arm mounted plasma rifle, which does 10 damage plus 1d6 heat to a heat-synced target. Against a non-heat-synced target like infantry, the rifle does its 10 flat damage plus an additional 2d6 damage. That's a possible 22 damage for those of you like me who went to public school and can't do math in your head. The 3UL Clint was given 3 tons of ammunition, which is 30 shots, stored in the right torso. No need for case, as the plasma ammunition is essentially fancy plastic foam cartridges that don't explode when critically hit. Backing up the rifle at mid and close range were 2 ER medium lasers that sit in their traditional center torso and left torso locations. Combined, the total Alpha Strike damage was 20 plus the plasma effect. Doing that on the run would net 2+ heat into the red, but that's no problem at all for a couple of turns. Jumping instead would lead to some small heat issues, but holding off on one of the medium lasers solves that issue on that turn. Overall, the 2-3UL Clint is surprisingly useful for a 40-tonner. If deployed in numbers, they could lock down a heavy or assault mech and chew it up like those little dinos from the forgettable Jurassic Park sequel. If you have a chance, definitely take this variant out for a spin. At that moment, the Javelin and Clint barreled out of the ravine, shot to the sky on wings of vented plasma plumes, and laid into the trebuchet with missiles, lasers, and autocannon shells. The pair worried armor plating all across the Peacemaker's flank, but one of the Javelin's SRMs burrowed through a chewed-up section of the Treb's left elbow bend. Cyril winced as the explosive force detonated through exterior seams from inside the arm, blasting away the few armor plates like roof shingles shorn off in high winds. Smoke trailed from the busted seams, and a second later the whole limb tore off in a sympathetic explosion as weapons in the arm's ammo-feed mechanism ignited. High Value Target, Counterattack, Battlecore Anthology, Volume 5, page 199-200, by Philip A. Lee. Our last official variant for the Clint arrived in 3109, which is as close as we're going to get to an IlClan upgrade, at least for now. Produced by Pinard Protectorates Limited on lines located on MacLeod's Land and the Taurian Concordat, the CLNT-3-4T is a surprisingly advanced design for what would have normally been written off as a periphery battlemech producer. The standard structure is no surprise for the Clint, but the installation of the 240XL engine sure is. Right off the bat, this isn't intended to be a bargain basement battlemech. The 4T's movement profile remained at 696, and it was given 10 double heat sinks. For protection, 7 tons of reflective armor was added, which provided 112 points of protection and that boost against incoming energy weapon fire. Beyond the XL engine and reflective armor, the other advanced features included a pair of medium X pulse lasers split between the center and left torso. For the uninitiated, these lasers are a compromise between ER lasers and pulse lasers, which basically split the difference. The medium X pulse laser weighs in at 2 tons, takes up 1 critical location, and can fire out to 9 hexes for 6 damage with a -2 improvement to its accuracy. Arguably, they could be considered the mech's primary weapon due to the fact that the only other weapon added to the mech was an LB-5X autocannon in the right arm, fed by 1 ton of Case 2 protected ammunition. For those doing the math at home, that's a total of 9 tons worth of mass on a mech devoted to doing 5 damage per shot or 5 scattershot damage. I may suck at investing, but even I know that's a questionable deal. Alas, I'm just the messenger here, so it is what it is. On the bright side, the LB-5X can hit out to 21 hexes and is in medium range at 14, so it could be fun at pestering other mechs. I'm nothing if irrationally optimistic. Overall, the Clint 3-4T is an entirely okay machine. It could be useful for hunting down lighter mechs and helping infantry self-actualize as charcoal, but I would hesitate to put it up against anything heavier than itself. While this might be the up-to-date story for the Clint in the Inner Sphere, the mech did take a different development path among the fledgling clans out in the deep periphery. The Clint 2C would look similar to its inspiration, but on the inside it would have all the bells and whistles we've come to appreciate from the Clan 2C designs. Constructed around an SR-2930 endosteel frame and a Type 81 Fusion 240XL engine, the Clint 2C had a lot more of its 40 tons to devote to other elements while still being stronger and just as fast as its inspiring cousin. It retained the 6 Andoran model JJ2 jump jets located in the legs and torsos, which allowed the Clint 2C to leap up to 180 meters, which is invaluable for a recon medium. The 7 tons of forging C629J standard armor offered decent coverage on par with the Strider and far more than the original. The Armstrong Buster autocannon was replaced with a Type KOV LB-10X autocannon, which added additional accuracy and flexibility for the mech's shots. Bolstering the power of the big gun, 2 Series 2D extended-range medium lasers were built into the center and left torsos to make sure that the mech would have something to shoot if it was in a fight long enough for the 4 tons of LB-10X ammunition to run out. Now I want to take a second to underline the fact that 4 tons of ammunition for the LB-10X is 40 shots. That's a lot of ammo for a 40-ton battle mech. I guess if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. The Clint 2C was fielded heavily by the Snow Ravens and would only see a decline in popularity along with many of the other 2C battle mechs with the invention and widespread adoption of OmniMech technology. The Clint's return fire hit the Thunderbolt hard, the PPC devouring nearly a ton of armor on the left side of the mech's chest. The 2 pulse lasers mounted in the Clint's torso converged on the Thunderbolt's midline. They cut bubbling furrows into the armor over the big mech's heart, but failed to breach it. Chris successfully fought the unbalancing effect of losing so much armor and kept his mech charging forward. Natural Selection, page 272 by Michael A. Stackpole. Of course, my unrestrained ego wouldn't let us go on without taking a crack at a totally unofficial and non-canon Mechfrog variant. My plan was to take the plasma rifle variant and push it even further with some more advanced technology. Buy the ticket, take the ride. The CLNT-23MF takes advantage of endosteel, a light fusion engine, and 6.5 tons of light ferrofibrous armor. 11 double heat sinks were added to help mitigate most of the heat generated by this monster. The right arm mounted plasma rifle was left in place, but the total ammunition was dropped to just 2 tons. In exchange, an actuator enhancement system was added to that arm in order to improve the rifle's aim by 1. The traditional 2 ER medium lasers were set into their places in the center and left torsos and added additional punch in the mid and short range. Finally, 2 ER small lasers were added to the right arm to take advantage of the AES, as well as dissuade light mechs and infantry from wandering too close. As if being bathed in plasma wasn't argument enough. The Alpha Strike damage at close range was 26 plus the plasma effect, but doing so on the run would leave the Clint 3MF at 4 plus heat into the red, which requires some heat management after the first shot. More so if you're leaping on those jump jets instead. Overall, I think the 3MF would be a fun mech to play, and it's a good demonstration about how ER medium lasers and plasma rifles play well together, sharing very similar range profiles. If you want to give it a go, I've included a free PDF record sheet for it in the video notes below. If it kicks butt, please come back and let me know. If it's horrible, then maybe keep that to yourself and come back to me and tell me it was amazing. Now just for fun, I did run a lance of the 3MFs against 3 heavier battle mechs in Megamech just to see what would happen. I picked an Archer 5R, Wolverine 11M, and a Shadowhawk 5D, and sent them out into the fray. The result was an incredibly close fight where the Shadowhawk ended up wrecking 2 of the Clints with its rotary autocannon while shrugging off plasma rifle shots because it doesn't suffer from any heat issues. We may have discovered the flaw in this plan. Eventually, the Archer and Wolverine got involved in the back and forth, and the Archer went down first after taking some shots on the back that knocked out its gyro. From there, the back and forth was intense until just 1 Clint was left alive fighting the Wolverine. Eventually, just through sheer luck and no skill on my part, the Clint was able to knock down the Wolverine and finish it off. The Clint was able to stumble off the battlefield, but it did so with 2 engine critical hits and smoking like Natasha Kerensky in her prime. The takeaways from the fight included going after mechs that run hot first rather than the coolest of the bunch if you can, and the AES paid for itself by making the ER small lasers a better option in many cases than the ER mediums, which were just a little too hot to handle the consistent fire. The improved accuracy for the plasma rifle was great, and I really didn't expect the ER smalls to produce like they did. Good on you, little lasers. A for the day. Moving up. A new voice called over the comm system, tinny and flat from transmission, but still edged with a trace of excitement. Busy holding his mech to its feet as PPCs from both Clints blasted the Wraith with man-made lightning. Eris at first thought the transmission came from one of his own warriors, It wasn't until his own pulse lasers bit deep into the Helios that he realized that the frequency flashed onto his heads-up display had been an infantry channel, and then the voice sparked recognition. The Killing Fields, The Capellan Solution, Volume 2, page 179 and 180, by Lauren L. Coleman. So why do we love the Clint? Besides making me want to watch Fistful of Dollars every time I say it, well, it's one of those classic 30-25 battle mechs that runs under the radar among more popular and even more infamous foes. I'd be willing to bet most BattleTech fans know more about the Cicada than they do the Clint, even though after refreshing their memories, most of us would probably take the Clint over the Cicada into battle. Though obviously not as popular as the other classic medium mechs, the Clint still manages to cling to a recognizably unique look. I described it to Minifrog as bear ears on its head, but he insists that they look more like bat ears. I'm starting to think we may need to update his eyeglass prescription soon. The Clint has plenty of solid official variants, most of which make sense, and it even responsibly employs an ER large laser, which is a rarity around these parts. If I were looking to plug a 40-ton hole in a lance, I think I could do far worse than the Clint. Of course, I'm curious what you think. Is the Clint a mech on your radar, or do you have trouble finding purpose for it? Let me know in the comments, and I'd also like to know what you think the best variant is for the Clint in its ideal form. With that, I'll say thank you for sticking around this long and listening to me blather. It's so much fun digging through all this lore and compiling what really is just a fancy book report for you. Another big thanks to the Mechfrog Discord server community that always has such well-painted models to share for the upcoming week's topic. If you'd like to join, I'll add the server link to this week's video notes. Come hang out and say hi. If you thought the video was worthwhile, hitting the like or subscribe button lets YouTube's algorithm know that it's worth sharing with others, and you're much more likely to see my nonsense in the future. If you want to go one step further, supporting the channel through Ko-fi or becoming a YouTube member keeps the nonsense flowing. Lately, YouTube has reined in support for mid-sized creators to boost larger accounts, so anything you can do to directly support the things you like seeing is appreciated. To all those who already have supported, thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means so much to me that you've placed your trust in me to keep improving as a content creator. With that, I'll say have a great week, and please go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.